Alright, hello Internet. My name is Kiana. I am an educator at the Emerald Coast Science Center. Unfortunately, we are closed with the current situation, but we wanted to make sure that we are still bringing you guys some educational content for while you're cooped up inside. So welcome to my back porch. And on my porch today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the beach, because that's one of the things that I miss most as I'm cooped up inside is the ocean and the beach. And so one of my favorite things talking about the beach is seashells. So that's going to be our first lesson today, is talking about some shells. So I brought some shells home from the center, but once we reopen, you guys are fully able to have access to these shells if you came in and visited us. So if you do see anything really interesting and you want to come in and check it out at another time, these are all shells that stay at the center, so they're all things that you can get your hands on, which is really cool. That was one of the most exciting things when I started working at the center, is seeing some of these shells, because this is one of the things that I've always been really interested in, but as you beachcombers are very familiar with, it is hard to get a good variety of shells. It's something we always go out there and try and find, but there's always new shells you find every single time you go, so all these shells are ones I haven't seen before, so that was something really exciting when I came into the center and got to experience new shells that I had never seen myself. So when we talk about seashells, there's a couple things that we are going to be covering today. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the classification of what a seashell is. So I've had people who didn't know that seashells came from living animals. They thought they were just like rocks that you find on the ground, but they aren't. They're things that are generated by these animals themselves. So seashells are part of the mollusk group of animals, and so that group of mollusks is broken down further, so you have things like cephalopods or octopus that are in there as well, but you also have some other ones that we're going to kind of break down. We've got some cool examples. So one of the ones I just said was a cephalopod, so that includes octopuses, but we do have cephalopods that also produce shells. So one of the ones that do that is this guy right here. So this is a chambered nautilus, so if you can see, that's what the outside of it looks like, but if you were to cut that guy right down in half, you can see all those different chambers in there, and they have a siphon that runs through there, and the animal is going to be living right there inside of that shell. So this is the mascot of our UWF Argos. They also have the academic mascot of a chambered nautilus, so that's where I went to school, so this guy is particularly interesting to me, so go Argos. But yeah, so this guy right here, he is also called the Argonaut. So that's another reason why we use that as our mascot as well. So, sorry, I got distracted reading. Anyway, so this guy is one of our categories. So we've got cephalopods. We also have, talk about these in a second. We also have these right here. So Scephalopoda is another group that we have. So these guys create tusk shells. And so as you can see, they're kind of just tusk shaped, so they're sort of like a cone. It's really elongated. These shells are pretty deep water, and they're not usually very colorful, so they're not something you see very often, and they're not something that's usually collected. But it is something you might run across that and might find and wonder what that is. But there's scephalopods. We also have these guys right here, which are mollusks that don't have a shell. And so this is called an Alepocophora. And so these guys, they're just mollusks that don't have a shell, but they've got a worm-like appearance to them. Then we have this guy right here. So this is Monopocophora. So that's just a way that we say one shell. So mono is a word that means one, right? So one shell, just like that. And then one that's really closely related to that guy, but a little bit different, is Polypocophora. So if mono means one, poly means many. So this is something that has many shells. So the common name for these guys are often called chitons. And so as you can see, they've got multiple shells that are all kind of together, and they are all attached. Usually it's 8 shells that are all interlaced there. These guys kind of will attach themselves to rocks a lot, so they're kind of like this shaped, and they'll gotta kind of just stick themselves to a surface, and as they're stuck to that surface, they'll kind of use their radula or their mouth to eat algae and stuff off of that rock surface. But usually when you find them, you'll find them stuck to something. So like I said, those are chitons or Polypocophoras. But the main two that we talk about when we talk about seashells are the gastropods and the bivalves. So bivalves are these guys right here. So they're usually 2 side shells, and they are attached by a hinge. So bi meaning 2, so bivalves, 2 shells. And then the other one that we have are our gastropods. And these guys are the ones that live in those spiral shells. These guys right here are whelks. But yeah, so the ones that we see most common are bivalves or gastropods. So today I'm going to be kind of showing you guys a couple little items from my shell collection here, but I'm also going to be telling you guys about some of my favorite shell books. If you do get interested in doing some beach combing once we are able to go back outside, you guys can buy these books and have them with you to help you identify these shells on your own. So one of my favorite ones is this one right here. So this is a book that we have at the center, but it's also a book that I have in my own personal collection because it's really interesting. Not only does it have a lot of different examples of shells, it also has some information that goes along with it, so it's really helpful. And I have a couple little bookmarks that I like to reference myself, some of my favorite shells, and we'll talk about some of those as we go through the shell collection here. So this is one of my favorite ones, and it's also specific to Florida shells, so that's really helpful as well because those are the ones I'm going to find, right? Florida shells. Another one I really like is this one right here. So this is Florida's Living Beaches. This one is a much thicker book and a much more scientific looking book because instead of fun stories like our other book has, this is mostly scientific names and descriptions. But another thing that's kind of cool about this one is it's not just shells, it's pretty much anything you would find at a beach. So they've got the shells, they've got insects, they've got plants, they've got birds, fish, all kinds of things in here. So this is another one that's really nice to have as a field guide while you're out there doing that beach combing. Okay, so when we're talking about shells have a couple different shapes and a couple different parts, and when you're classifying or identifying them, it's helpful to know the names of those parts so that you can kind of describe them and read about them in a way that you understand. So when we are looking at some of our big shells, we have a couple different ones over here that are big and nice for examples. Let me see. So this is, like I said, we were looking at these before, this is a whelk, and so while we're looking at these, this is a pretty standard gastropod. We also have conchas that are really similar as well. So if you were to look at this guy here, you've got your big opening here. So this is called the aperture, so like your cameras, the little opening or the little lens part of your camera is called the aperture, so it's the open part, and that's what it's called on our shells as well. We also have this right here, so this is its spire, so that little part there has all the whorls, and the whorls are going to go up into this column here, and that's its spire, and at the top you have the apex. Another thing that a lot of these shells have when they are alive, obviously these ones are no longer alive, but at one time they did have a living creature inside. Something that these guys will have is something that covers this aperture or this opening here, and they will use that to cover the aperture to help keep the moisture inside those shells, right? Because these guys live in the ocean, so when they're out on the beaches or they get washed up, they like to close off that opening so they can keep all that moisture inside. And so I have an example of what a teeny tiny one looks like, but I was trying to see if I had an example of a bigger one. But if you look really closely here, let's see if I can get that to focus. So if you look really closely here, you can see that there is something blocking that aperture. And so that is called its operculum. So that operculum is just kind of like a tough leathery thing. Sorry, I live close to an airport. So that's just kind of a tough leathery thing that they use to cover up that opening when they are exposed to dry air. So that way they don't dry out and die. Yeah, so these guys are living creatures in here, and so they do have a squishy body that they have inside of their shell. And so they need to keep it nice and moist. And then that body actually has what we call a foot. So it's not really what we think of as our feet, but it's just basically the part of their body that's going to stick out of their shell and allow them to move. So we call it their foot. So that foot's going to be how they're going to kind of stick that out and move around as they're going through the water. Something else about these guys is another thing we see a lot of times having shells like these are hermit crabs, right? But the difference is those hermit crabs are not generating their own shells. They actually just are opportunistically commandeering the houses left over by past gastropods. So they find empty shells left behind by these animals once they die, and they just take over those houses. But our gastropods here, they have to generate or make their own shells themselves. So they're able to secrete different things like calcium to help make that shell, and it's going to grow as they grow. So as they're growing, these guys are going to be adding layers and adding to the outer edge of their bodies to create more whorls. So for this guy here, you can see as he grows, he's going to add another layer going this way and this way and this way, and so he's going to keep growing around and around as he gets bigger. Yeah. So like I said, we've got some different body parts of our shells, and those are the ones that most of the ones that we have for our gastropods. When we talk about our bivalves, like I said, those are ones that are two shells that are usually connected together. We oftentimes do not see these guys connected together on the beach once they've washed up and died. We usually only see them in a complete pairing when they're alive, because these guys are kept together by muscles or hinges, and those muscles are just protein based, so they dissolve really quickly after the animal dies. So usually by the time it's washed up on our shores, it's already broken in half because those hinges have dissolved. This is what it would look like out in the water, so it would have both parts attached right here. So this part of our shell here, this is called its umbo, so this part right there, right where they're attached. And so those are kept together by a little hinge that, like I said, is going to dissolve. A lot of times these guys have little openings that allow for a siphon to come out, so it's a way that they are able to get water in and out as they're breathing. And they can also use those little openings to get out appendages to feed. So they'll stretch something out in the water, filter feed some little particles out of the water, and eat that. And that's going to be how they're going to feed. So they'll have a couple openings along their edges here as well. But yeah, so if you were to open this guy up, we've got a couple different things we usually see on the inside here of their shell. So you can see here we've got what are called muscle scars. So these are where muscles were attached, and so when those shells were being kept closed together, those muscles keeping them closed were attached right there, and so they leave a scar. Also leave a lateral line right here as well. Let's see what else. Alright, so something else we can talk about with our bivalves here. Let's see if I can get a good one. So a lot of these guys are oftentimes eaten by our gastropods. So usually there are a lot more bivalves in the ocean than there are gastropods, and a lot of times the gastropods end up feeding on the bivalves. So something that's really commonly seen is you'll find a shell like this that has a perfect little hole drilled in it, making it a perfect candidate to become a necklace, right? You can feed a piece of string right through there and you've got a ready-made necklace. This hole right here actually came from a predatory gastropod. So what these guys right here, these are called moon snails. These guys have a really sharp radula that they're able to drill into the shell of these bivalves. And so they drill into the shell and they're able to access the soft, meaty inside, and then they're going to eat the animal that lived inside the shell. So that's something you see a lot, is these little perfectly drilled holes. Those usually come from predatory gastropods. We're going to kind of be following along a little bit with our book so that we can look at a couple other examples that we have, because like I said, these books have really good pictures and stories and fun facts and stuff like that too. So we're going to kind of follow along with that a little bit to kind of guide us through our shell collection here, but I think I'm going to start out with just some of the ones that I almost always see on our beaches, some of the most common ones that you're probably going to find. So as far as gastropods go, those ones are typically my favorite ones to find because I think they're really interesting, so the ones with a spiral. So the gastropod that I see here most often are these guys right here. So this is called an olive, and so these guys have a really long whorl as their body whorl, and then their spire's pretty short, and they have this nice long aperture. Something else that's kind of cool about these guys is they're pretty shiny usually. So there are a lot of shells that have a more opaque or matte finish to them, but then there's some like our olives and our cowries here that are shiny. So the reason for this is because when these guys are alive, they usually have a mantle or a body that kind of covers up their shell a little bit and keeps it covered, and so it keeps it shiny while it's alive, and then once it dies, it's usually got that little bit of shininess still to its shell. So it's not always exposed to that salt water, and so it keeps it shiny for longer. So another shell that we have that does that is these guys right here. So these are much smaller, but these are called a flamingo tongue, and these are one of my favorite ones, and I never usually seen these at our beaches. They're more common in like the Florida Keys and down south, but they're one of my favorites. But when they are alive, they actually look like this right here. So as you can see, this is the shell that we've got now, but when it was alive, it looked like this guy right here. So it had a outer covering or a body covered that shell, and so it keeps it nice and shiny. So another one that we see a lot of times on our beaches, as far as bivalves go, are these guys right here. These are one of my favorite shells to identify because they're pretty easy to pick out of a crowd. So these guys are scallops. And one of the things you can always look for to identify a scallop is the square bottom here that it has on its umbo. So like I said, that part's its umbo, and this has this squared little sections here right by that part. So instead of it looking like this guy here, it's got that square at the top. So scallops are gonna have that. This guy right here, this is a cockle. This is also a pretty common shell that we have here. They're pretty thick, and they've got these nice big ridges, and they're also pretty tall arch to them as well. So cockles are another one that we see a lot of times. But those guys, like I said, they're bivalves, so they come in 2 halves. So usually you would see these guys when they're alive attached together, but obviously these guys have already passed, so they have broken apart like we were talking about. But something cool about scallops is that when they are alive, they do have the ability to swim a little bit. So usually you would see shells, they kind of are benthic, so they'll stay on the bottom and they'll crawl across the seafloor and stuff like that. But these guys have the ability to swim a little bit. And so what they'll do is they're going to actually be attached just like this, and they'll open and close their opening and kind of pump water in and out to kind of push them along. So when they're swimming, they're going to be opening and closing, and they'll be swimming along like that. So that's something pretty cool about these. A lot of species of scallops also have a rounded and a flat side. So this side will be its rounded side, and this side would be its flat side. Alright, so let's take a look. We also have a couple different kinds of scallops. So this, the first one I showed you, the one we have most commonly around here, those are called calico scallops. We also have this guy right here, so this is a lion's paw scallop. Then we have this guy is also called a thorny scallop, or a thorny oyster scallop, depending on who you ask. Yeah, so let's see which other ones we've got in here that are pretty interesting. I think one of my favorite shells in this collection is actually this guy right here. So this is called an angel wing, and it's pretty obviously why they're called that. So when it has both halves, it looks like a nice set of angel wings. And so these guys would normally be attached right here, and then they've got this long body, looks like a little angel. Okay. So these guys would look like in the pairing is this right here. So they have a pairing, they've got the part where they're attached at their hinge, they've got a spoon where their body was connected. And then we also have these other gastropods that we see pretty often, or these other bivalves that we see really often on our beaches called coquinas. And so, sorry, my little dog's chasing a squirrel. If you want to see Toby over here. Yep, that's my friend hanging out with me while we are self-quarantined. So coquinas are bivalves that we have really often on our beaches. We see these guys washed up on the shores, as well as alive in the surf, because they live in that surf or that wave area, which is where we hang out as well. And so a lot of times these guys get washed in with a wave, and so they either wash up dead or then they wash up alive. And what these guys like to do is, so they'll come out onto the sand, and they'll kind of tip themselves up like this, and they'll drill themselves back down into the sand. So they'll dig into the sand. So these guys are called coquinas. And so as you can see, those are all of its little appendages there that help it to dig back into the sand. So this is what it would look like sitting on the sand. And as you can see, this guy right here has kind of turned himself upward, so he's going to dig himself back down into the sand. So these, like I said, are called coquinas. They're one of the most common ones I tend to see on our beaches. Let's see what else we got here. So if we want to just go in and talk about some of these shells that we might not see as often but are still pretty cool ones, we've got some gastropods, like this guy right here. So we talked about him earlier. This is a whelk. Something kind of cool about these gastropods is they can be left or right-handed. Whelks here tend to be left-handed, and the way that you would tell that is basically which of your hands would fit into its aperture and follow along with its whirl. So as you can see, I could fit my hand, well, if it's bigger, I could fit my hand into it on its left side, my left hand into it on its left side, and it would be able to grip around the center or that spire. So it's a left-handed whelk. But our conch here is a right-handed, so I fit my right hand into it just like that, so it's right-handed. So like I said, our whelks are usually left-handed, but these guys also are egg layers. Something kind of cool is that we can find these egg casings washed up on our beaches as well. And so this came from a whelk. So whelk egg casings. Yeah. So let's see, we also have these guys right here. These are called bonnets, so they've got a nice wide opening and a nice rounded top. Let's see what else we got. We have these are called stars. We talked about our olives. These are our cowries. These are our conches. We've got murex, whelks, nereids, are these guys right here. We also have turnips or tulips. It's right here. We have genorias. Another one of my favorite ones is this guy right here. So let me find a good spot for him to sit so you can see. So this guy is called a carrier shell. And so I'm going to find another example of one of these in the book because they have lots of variation in them, because what they're going to do is while they grow, they're going to attach different objects to themselves. So as you can see, the example I have has chosen to attach little pieces of rocks to himself. But depending on where that shell lives, it's going to pick up different objects and choose to attach those to himself. So let me see if I can find an example of some in this book, because they can attach pieces of trash, they can attach shells, they can attach rocks like this one can, all kinds of things, just depending on what they can find. So here's our example of our carrier shells that have attached large rocks like this guy, or even other gastropods like that guy there. Let's see what else. We also have our picture of our chiton, or polyplecopter, that we talked about earlier. So that's what he would look like alive. So you can see his mantle or his body or his foot sticking out the sides and all of his interlocked shells together. We have our flamingoes tongue, which are these little ones right here. And our tulips, which I said were these guys right here. Over here we've got some thorny oysters. We have a jewel box. We have these guys right here. So these are called pen shells. So they're really thin, so as you can see, a lot of these break. But they're really long and really thin. And they've got this kind of shininess on the inside of them. Another shell that's going to have a good example of that shininess right here is our oyster shell. So as you can see, it's got this iridescent shiny layer on the inside of a shell here. So that's called mother of pearl. So we know oysters are able to generate pearls. And the way that they do that is when a foreign object like a piece of sand or a piece of rock or something were to get inside of the shell, they have a really soft, squishy body, right? And so they're going to be irritated by that itchy piece of sand in there. So what they do is they can coat that sand or that, rock or whatever it is that got in there with this little shiny layer of mother of pearl. So as they're coating that piece of sand or that rock, it's going to be adding that layer of that mother of pearl, and so then the thing that forms inside is going to be what we collect as those pearls. So that's how those pearls are generated, is by those oysters coating that little piece of foreign material with that mother of pearl. Yeah, so I think we've talked about a lot of the shells that we have here. We've got a couple other examples of shells. So we've got these guys. This is our worm shell. Got these guys here, which are cones. There are species of cones that actually do have some toxins in them, so those are shells you wouldn't want to pick up out in the wild. Got this guy right here. This is actually called a turkey wing. So he's got a really long hinge here. It's really flat. And his pattern here kind of looks like a feather, so they're called turkey wings. But yeah, so these are a lot of the shells that we have on our beaches. Like I said, we also have these right here. These are a little bit different. These are called barnacles, but they do oftentimes get mistaken for some of these other kinds of shells. But these come from barnacles, so the animal will be living inside, and he's got appendages that stick out the top here that he's going to use to filter feed or to breathe or things like that, right? So we have a couple other things here that I'm going to switch these guys over that we have seen on our beaches. And so we're going to talk about a couple things like that you might come across. So in here, I've got some things like these right here. These are called mermaids' purses or devil's purses. These are eggs that are oftentimes laid by things like sharks or rays or skates. We have some shark teeth, which you might find from time to time as well. So sharks have jaws that are continuously renewing their teeth. So they have rows and rows of teeth that are on a conveyor belt. So as that shark loses his teeth, he's got another set of teeth right behind it. So finding shark teeth is pretty common because they lose and replace his teeth really often. Let's see, we also have some coral fragments, some egg casings. We have a sea sponge in here. Sponge. And in this one, we've got a couple different other kinds of animals. So like I was saying with our shells, those are gonna be mollusks, but we also have a couple different other kinds of animals. One of them being echinoderms. So echinoderms are animals that have spiny skin, so that's where that term echinoderm comes from. So that's gonna include things like sand dollars, sea urchins, starfish, things like that. So here's our sea star, part of that echinoderm group there. Underneath, they've got this ridge with tube feet, so those little feet kind of work like turkey basters or pipettes. So the way that it would work is it works using water. So what it would do is it's got a little bulb on the inside and then the little tube coming out the end. So it would squeeze to suck up things, and so when it's using that suction there, it's going to stick pretty well to that surface. And then it can actually expel that water as well to release. So it's kind of how it works, is by pumping water in and out to help them create that suction on the end, and that's how they're going to grab things and move around. We also have, like I said, in our echinoderm group, we've got things like our sand dollars. So we see these a lot of times on our beaches. These are called arrowhead sand dollars. These guys, when they're alive, they have a layer of skin on the outside of them, and then they also have all these holes or linguals as well. And so let me see if I can find a good picture of our sand dollar alive. Because like I said, when it's alive, it's got a layer of skin on it, so it's going to be kind of like an orangish greenish color, brownish green color, and it's going to be a little fuzzy. So other than sand dollars, we also have a couple different other echinoderms that are really closely related. So here's our picture of them. Doesn't have a good picture of them alive, but it would be just like this, but fuzzy and brownish on the outside. We also have this guy right here. So this guy is much thicker than our sand dollar here is. So this is called a sea biscuit. And so inside here, they have their jaw pieces. So as you shake it around, you can kind of hear it, and you can get some sand and stuff that falls out as well. But its mouthpieces all are inside of their body here, and a lot of times when you break them open, they look like little birds. Yeah, we also have this guy right here. This is part of a sea whip. This is part of our sea urchin. And this guy right here, so he's a little bit thicker as well. These guys are called sea pancakes. So they're a little thicker than our sand dollar was. Their shapes are a little bit different, or their openings are a little different as well, but these are called sea pancakes. Alright guys, I think that's about all of the cool things I've got out for us to look at today. I've got some little teeny tiny shells too, so you can see that they start off pretty small and they grow bigger and bigger, and so there's different species that can be different sizes, but these guys are whelks as well. So as you can see, a whelk can be teeny tiny or it can be pretty big. They actually can be the size of about my arm too, so they can get even bigger than that. But that's about all I have to say about our shells. So like I said, there's all these shells that stay right at our center there, so if you ever want to get your hands on some that you haven't been able to find out on the beach by yourself, you can definitely come into the center once we reopen, and you can check out these things for yourself. So I always encourage you guys to do that. If there's anything that you guys are curious about, especially concerning the ocean, I would love to cover some more ocean topics, so please let me know if there's anything that you're particularly curious about. I'm going to be trying to follow up this video with a couple different other ocean videos, so keep an eye out for those. And then on the Science Center Facebook, we also have live videos pretty much every day during the week at about 10 a.m. So we'll be doing some follow-along science experiments and some also some creature features, where you can see some of our animals that live there at the center. So keep an eye out for those, and then also keep an eye out for when we'll be opening up, because I'm sure once we open up, we'll be super excited to come see you guys. So please come and visit us once our doors are reopened, and stay safe during these times, and wash your hands, and be nice to each other, and I hope this blows over soon and we can check out some fun things at the Science Center together. Bye guys!